Hi everybody, and welcome to my channel. My name is Lou, and I like to research random topics about things that happen in the world and whatever piques my interest at that time. So yeah, this is going to be a video essay, and my channel is mainly going to be a video essays. This is mostly for me, because I like research, but yeah, if you don't like it, please don't tell me because I will cry. Anyway, let's get started. So today we're going to talk about periods, and more specifically the myth of the perfect period. I'm going to focus on ads from the 70s and 80s that advertise period products. We will analyze 4 ads from that time period, and we will analyze them in order to debunk that myth. We will also touch on more modern period products ads, for example, the ones that portray real blood. I mean, not real blood, but like red liquid, and the very recent, actually, inclusion of trans men in period products ads. So obviously, as a disclaimer, because of the period of time I'm covering, there will be mentions of women, and I'm talking about cis women because the 70s and 80s were not known to be super inclusive times for trans men. Since the dawn of time, women bleed every month. We get menstruations, they cause disgust, worry, and people fail to understand them, men or women. For thousands of years, menstrual blood has been considered impure, according to Middle Ages beliefs. The main monotheistic religions contributed to that fear, to that phobia of menstrual blood, and have been ostracizing women. In the Old Testament, women are deemed impure 7 days of the month. Their husbands do not touch them out of fear to be soiled by this unknown manifestation. We could think that those practices of putting women aside during their menstruation can stem from the fact that medicine was not super developed at that time, and people were not familiar with this anatomical phenomena. Medicine was simply not evolved enough to give scientific explanations. So yeah, it was pretty demonized. Through history, periods are synonymous to shame, filth, lack of hygiene. In some cultures, women are forbidden to cook while on their periods so that they do not contaminate the food. Women are held to hide that they have them. So yeah, the weight of the unsaid influences how women deal with their sanitary protection. They had to find their own ways to protect their clothes during their period because nobody talked about it and nobody advertised about it. That is until Listow's towels came around in 1896. This brand was the first ever to offer women sanitary protections that were safe, and women were able to order them through the post. It was a discreet and convenient way to give women protection without having to advertise in broad daylight. But yeah, the stigma around periods still continue to this day. According to a survey from Clue conducted in April of 2018, which, by the way, ladies that live in America, please delete your period tracking apps right now. Times are weird. Do it. So yeah, according to this survey, only 15% of women have intercourse during their period. Those statistics do not tell whether those 15% of women do not want to have intercourse during their period or if it's their partners that don't want it. Nevertheless, this very low percentage of women is unequivocal as to the perception of intercourse during those days. Such constant, uninformed prejudices and other timeless traditions, so anchored in the collective imagination, have pushed women over time to campaign to establish the truth about periods. Their aim is to normalize this purely anatomical phenomena that happens to any person with a uterus. Some women want to lift this veil. They want to get rid of this unjustified stigma around periods. Their goal is also to fight against unrealistic depictions of women on their period by creating their own campaigns for feminine products, more educational and less influenced by shame or the pressure to have the perfect period, like the ads in the mainstream does. Those women I'm talking about are are menstrual activists. Those menstrual activists want women to be aware of their body, especially in the midst of the toxic shock syndrome of the 80s. I will go back to that later on in the video. In this video essay, I'm going to focus on period products ads with a time period starting from the 1970s through the 1980s. This time slot is particularly interesting to me, at least, because it allows us to note a clear evolution of how sanitary products were being advertised back then. So, to show this evolution and those actions effectively, I'm going to compare period product ads from the mainstream media, mostly magazines, to the more educational ads and campaigns led by menstrual activists to raise awareness during those times. So how are women and periods portrayed in menstrual products ads from the 1970s into the 1980s? How did menstrual activists decide to fight against period misinformation divulged by these mainstream ads? Before I begin this analysis, it is important to give a broad definition of what I mean by menstrual activism. There is not one specific group of menstrual activists, but rather several. They can be doctors, feminists, mothers, and even big corporations sometimes. Their common goal is to make a change for the better when it comes to period positivity in a comprehensive and educational way, far from shame and disgust. They want women to understand their body in order to stop being ashamed of it, and they want little girls to discover this bodily function as healthily as possible. It is important to note that before 1972, sanitary protection was banned from being advertised on TV and the radio. Autumn Stanley, in her book Mothers and Daughters of Invention, 1993, explains that the Tassaway Company still ran ads for their products on stations that were not subscribed to the National Association of Broadcasters Code. When the NAB noticed that their ads were not provoking any reaction, they decided to lift this ban for all radio stations in November of 1972. This goes to show that period product advertising was very taboo and was regarded as too inappropriate for radio stations. Obviously, having a ban on sanitary products ads contributes to misinformation and a general lack of knowledge on the subject. It leads to the creation of an unhealthy myth around periods in society. Magazine ads for period products were more common, however, and even if they have been present for a long time, they still spread wrong information and unrealistic expectations about periods. So the 4 ads that I have selected for this video essay portray this unrealistic image of women on their periods and other misinformation that contribute to strengthen the myth around them. So yeah, that was a lot of contextualizing. I'm so sorry, but I thought it was mandatory to get the whole picture here. So this video essay will be structured in that fashion, basically. So I will talk about one ad from mainstream media and talk about an action led by some kind of menstrual activist or a group of menstrual activists, and so on and so forth for the second, third, and fourth one. Okay, so the first ad that I have selected is an ad for Playtex tampons from 1971. So at first glance, this ad has a positive message and a positive choice of words. For example, we see the word protects, improved, self-adjusting. So we also notice the words many women that go along with the drawings on the side. We see groups of women. There is an overall sense of unity in this ad. There is also a good balance of information. So we see photos of the tampon expanding in the glass and of creativity. We have attractive colors and composition. However, if we take a closer look, we notice the careers those women are portrayed in. So stewardess, model, nurse, secretary, housewife. Even though the goal of the ad was to empower women, this ad encloses them and depicts them in stereotypically feminine careers. So weirdly enough, this ad puts forth the modernity of their tampon, but at the same time, it forwards stereotypical women careers. And another issue worth pointing out here, where is the word period in this ad? Where is the word period? Can't see it. So, in that decade, a lot of actions and campaigns were led by menstrual activists. The first I'm going to talk about is an informational short film by Cinemaker and Johnson & Johnson in 1973. It's called Naturally A girl. It is roughly 14 minutes long, and it is aimed at preteen and teenage girls. It aims to help this demographic get a better understanding of how periods work, of their bodies, and honestly, the approach is surprisingly progressive and comprehensive. Teenage girls and boys are shown talking about periods. This presence of boys is particularly groundbreaking, especially for the 70s. It shows a will to educate girls and boys the same, even on girl matters. This film goes in depth into hygiene, the function of the uterus through scientific diagrams. It advises about how sanitary products work, changes in skin, body odor during puberty, how to track your periods, how to relieve your period cramps. Pretty good. My interpretation of this film is that there is a clear emphasis on normalizing everything surrounding periods. We hear sentences like, I quote, "There's no reason why you can't do all the things you want to do while you are menstruating," or the phrase, "There's no need to miss out on any of the fun just because you're menstruating." We also hear other positive statements such as, "It's great being a woman," or "It's just natural." And the closing statement on this movie is, "Being a woman is one of the things I like best about myself. I think you'll like it too." So yeah, it's cute, it's effective. Naturally a Girl also mentions the future of these girls as women. They're showing a collection of images of working women, ranging from secretary at her desk to electrician fixing cables on top of a 40-foot pole. This health short film goes way beyond just talking about periods, in my opinion. It talks about the experience of having your period by showing sanitary products. Yeah, it does do that, but it shows the overall experience of being a woman. Around that same time, in March of 1973, the Boston Women's Health Book Collective published a book titled Our Bodies Ourselves, a book by and for women. This collective was formed in the spring of 1969 when some women decided to come together after they realized that they all felt frustrated and angry because of the patriarchy, really. Relatable. They were also pretty mad at doctors that they deemed too condescending and uninformative. It was time for them to educate women in their own way, since they thought doctors and the media and other informational sources were not going in depth enough. The book I'm talking about mainly focuses on abortion, menstruation, and body image. And they were the first one, at least on paper, to denounce the unrealistic image of women in period ads. They were pointing out how far removed from a period mainstream ads for sanitary products were portraying them. Now, moving on to the second ad I have selected. This one is from 1978, and it is for Stayfree maxi pads. This ad by Stayfree shows a woman climbing a hill in white shorts with a man looking at her lovingly from behind. The photo is obviously outrageously stereotypical and objectifying a woman, but the text beneath is interesting to analyze. We learn that this woman got her period the day her hiking trip started, and that she didn't want, I quote, bumpy belts and pins showing through her shorts. What this text is trying to put forth is the new adhesive pad, which was a real upgrade in women's lives compared to the sanitary belts. They were reaching an end at the end of the 70s, but they were still pretty common. It is interesting to note that Stayfree chose to put the sexist image in the forefront of the ad instead of the novelty the adhesive pads were back then. It is almost as if they're trying to advertise to men, since the comfort of women is not the argument they chose to prioritize. We also notice the beginning of the stay active during your period trend. The woman is in a risky position. She's wearing white shorts. The slogan, "Stay free. They're how active women stay active." Yeah, whatever. The most striking thing about this ad is the male presence, obviously. We can wonder why a man would be shown in a period products ad, especially at a time when men did not bother to learn or educate themselves on that topic. So my interpretation here is, I think the only reason this man would be portrayed on the ad would be to turn the woman on the image into a desirable entity, which is incredibly ironic given the fact that that big myth around periods is that they are disgusting and impure. That is super hypocritical. In parallel, in October of 1978, a menstrual activist named Gloria Steinem, my queen, my absolute queen, that lady wrote an essay called "If Men Could Menstruate, a Political Fantasy." This essay was published in a magazine that she co-founded with other menstrual activists. It was called Mrs., and it was a feminist magazine that started in 1971. In this essay, you might have guessed it from the title, Gloria imagines a world in which men would get periods. She opens with this thought. For centuries, men have built cultures around the idea that wanting to be a man is a natural wish for a woman because women have always wanted the same privileges as men. She goes on to say that it makes very little sense that men would be the strong sex because their reproductive organs are outside of their bodies and thus make them feel vulnerable and make them vulnerable, and that women, being the ones that literally create fully whole human beings out of their uterus and giving birth to them by the sole force of their reproductive organs, should be the stronger ones. Gloria, my girl, could not agree more. Literally could not agree more. So there she poses a question. What if men could menstruate? To her, the answer is unequivocal. I quote, "The answer is clear. Menstruation would become an inviolable, boast-worthy, masculine event. Men would brag about how long and how much." As we read on, Steinem points out the fact that if men got their periods, women would still be inferior for the very reason that they would not get their period. She's not wrong. She's not wrong. And with humor, Steinem denounces what would happen on a political level. I quote, "Sanitary supplies would be federally funded and free. Military men, right-wing politicians, and religious fundamentalists would cite menstruation as proof that only men can serve in the army, occupy political office, be priests or ministers." And she also attacks left-wing male politicians. I quote, "Male radicals, left-wing politicians, mystics, however, would insist that women are equal, just different," implying that whatever women may or may not do, whatever women have or do not have, men will always find a way to position themselves higher than women. And she finishes her essay with that sentence, I quote, "In fact, if men could menstruate, the power justifications could probably go on forever if we let them." This conclusion shows a determination, a goal, especially using the pronoun we. She knows who she is addressing, the readership of a feminist magazine, and she is calling for women to stand up for their rights. So Steinem, by this essay, unveils the world-old taboo that are menstruations and uses it as a political tool. This essay is honestly one of the most important pieces in feminist theory, and it is still referred to nowadays. Editing me here. You'll notice that in the next 20 minutes of the video, I have like a crumb on my lip. It's so devastating. Anyways, ignore it. Thank you. The third ad I'm going to talk about is by Reali in 1980. It is for their new super absorbent tampon. This ad is very different from the other ads from that era because it does not show pictures of women. It has a scientific approach with the instructions at the bottom, and the choice of the color blue hints to a more medical safe device. This ad actually hit the magazines right after tampons and sanitary pads were recognized as medical devices by the FDA. In the wake of that 1976 medical amendment, sanitary product ads followed the medical trend. Ironically enough, this medical device classification also means that tampons and pads manufacturers are not obliged to disclose all the ingredients on the box label. So we cannot talk about the super absorbent tampons in the 80s without mentioning the toxic shock syndrome crisis. Toxic shock syndrome is defined as follows. I will read the definition. A rapidly developing, sometimes fatal infection characterized by sudden onset of fever, gastrointestinal upset, a sunburn-like rash, and a drop in blood pressure caused by a Staphylococcus aureus toxin occurring especially in menstruating women using high absorbency tampons. In her thesis called The Menstrual Body in 2013, Ashley Patterson explains the start of the toxic shock syndrome as follows. I quote, "By 1980, Procter & Gamble had mailed out over 60 million Rely samples to women in the country, and as the product hit store shelves, it reaped nearly 24% of sales in the feminine product market. Shortly after the New York launch of Rely, Judy Brayman, a leader of a consumer advocate group, reported to the Empire State Consumer Association that women had begun calling with complaints. Those were complaints of diarrhea and vomiting after using the super absorbent tampon sample. While many women were praising the invention of this teabag-shaped tampon, the CDC too began getting complaints. Women were reporting strange body rashes and high fever. So yeah, the early 1980s mark the identification of this infection because more and more cases in healthy women were being reported. Those reports of toxic shock syndrome were occurring in 95% of the cases in menstruating women. Studies and investigations have showed that TSS has been linked to women wearing super absorbent tampons for a longer time without changing them. Because as we can see on the ad under study, the main advertising argument lies on the promise of a longer protection from leaks. The vaginal pH during menstruations is higher, so the proliferation of bacteria is quicker. According to the CDC, between 1980 and 1983, over 2,200 toxic shock syndrome cases have been reported to the FDA, including 38 deaths. Facing the outburst of this new disease, menstrual activists and women in general needed to take action. Menstrual activists this time are joined by doctors in their battle from the CDC to give more weight to their revendications. They're asking for more transparency when it comes to the display of the ingredients on the box label and for a safety guarantee when they're using a product. They are met with a strong refusal from these tampon and pads companies. Those companies assert that they have nothing to do with the TSS crisis. So, menstrual activists team up with doctors from laboratories to analyze the composition of the tampons. Upon investigation, it has been proven that those tampons contain polyester foam, as well as a super hard to pronounce scientific word that I'm gonna show on the screen right now. That guy is in there as well, yeah. And it is an excipient responsible for the absorption capacity of the tampon, basically. The result was that in September of 1980, Rely super absorbent tampons were removed from the shelves. In 1984, the Women Health International Group creates a petition directed to the FDA asking for a more rigorous bill of specification when it comes to ingredients found in sanitary products. And they obtain the removal of all super absorbent tampons shortly after. So the popularity of tampons dropped even more after this crisis. The journalist Nancy Friedman published a book called Everything You Must Know About Tampons in 1981. It reports back on the TSS crisis and introduces women to alternative sanitary protection. Her goal with this book is to raise awareness for the hazard of tampons. Later on in 1989, the microbiologist Philip Tierno allied with the Women Health International Group, and he basically confirms the correlation between TSS and superabsorbing materials and excipients, such as the previously mentioned word that I cannot say. He alerts consumers and advises to look for other solutions than superabsorbent tampons or tampons in general to protect your clothes from your period. So before the toxic shock syndrome crisis of 1980, 70% of American women were tampon users. And after that crisis, only 55% of American women were still buying tampons. I'm super scared of tampons, honestly. Okay, so we're on to the last ad. The last ad that I selected is from 1981 by Stayfree. And more specifically for their deodorant maxi pads. This ad portrays women being active during their period in a different way the previous ad did. Here, there is no male presence. Women are at the center of the campaign, and more specifically, Kathy Rigby, a well-known gymnast, is at the center of it. Although the message is a slightly less sexist one, women are faced with another period problem: body odor. This new maxi pad has perfume in it to, I quote, keep you feeling fresh and confident. And that perpetuates the myth that periods stink, periods are smelly, and that smelling is not normal. So yeah, okay, this ad encourages women to be active and fresh and confident during their period. It can be empowering to see that, but it can also put pressure on women that feel tired, the ones that are faced with super severe period pains, or the ones with pathologies such as endometriosis. My point is, normalizing and encouraging activeness during menstruation is a false positive message. One of the main problems with ads from that decade is that those major brands of period products put unrealistic expectations on women's shoulders. You have to smell good, be active, be sexy during your period. Havens and Swenson, in their article called Imagery Associated with Menstruation Advertising Targeted to Adolescent Women, published in Adolescence in 1988, analyzed a sample of period product ads from 1976 to 1986 in 17 magazine. They pointed out the fact that menstruation was presented as a hygienic crisis, and they also noted a clear evolution of the message in those ads. They went from a rather scientific approach with data and statistics to having images of athletic girls for the purpose of empowerment. I have been talking a lot about magazine ads in this essay, so for my conclusion for the 80s, I want to talk about a TV commercial that aired in 1985 starring Courtney Cox. It is a commercial for Tampax tampons. We see Courtney Cox in a changing room next to her locker. She talks about how she feels cleaner with a tampon and goes on to say, I quote, "It can actually change the way you feel about your period." So even though the commercial still focuses on being active during your period and also still implies that periods can make you feel dirty, this commercial was revolutionary for the time because it was the first time in American history that the word period was said on TV. Yeah, period commercials had always implied the word or used euphemisms to refer to it, but period was a forbidden word on American TV. Maybe because censors were afraid to shock the children, or maybe because periods are so taboo that you cannot even put your finger on what makes it taboo in the end. A comparable revolution in period commercials happened a few years ago. We are all familiar with the blue liquid poured onto the pad to mimic blood and show the incredible absorption of whatever brand of pad it is. Some argue that it puts an emphasis on hygiene and cleanliness because the blue liquid is so unnatural that people had the luxury of not even thinking about periods while watching a commercial about periods. This blue liquid idea dates back to the 1990s. I could not find a reliable source as to when exactly it started or what brand exactly used it first, but before that, water was used to demonstrate the efficiency of a sanitary product, which is also quite removed from actual period blood. But in 2017, a revolution started thanks to a commercial by Bodyform. It does not advertise a specific period product per se, but it does show a man buying a pack of pads, a woman in her shower free bleeding, and most importantly, a blood-like liquid poured onto a sanitary pad. My point in stepping out of my set time frame is the following. Period commercials and period ads evolve along with the women in different decades. A revolutionary ad in 1985 and a revolutionary ad in 2017 hold the same meaning. Ad executives adapt to the women of their time. If we go back to the first ad in the 1960s, women started to leave the house to get a job, and it shows on the ad. The second ad from the early 70s resonates with the sexual revolution, since the ad that I chose showed a woman in a rather sexual position. And in the 1980s, many women liked fitness and caring about their body image, something we see in both ads that I have selected from that decade. After the TSS crisis, the ads became more scientific and put forth the safe product medical device factor, which made perfect sense because women needed to be reassured after this terrible crisis. As for the 2017 Bodyform ad displaying blood-like liquid, ad executives understood that feminist movements aimed at normalizing period blood and that this battle was trendy in a way, especially on social media. With all these examples throughout the years, we can say that even though the end result is most of the time times sexist and stereotypical, it is obvious that people creating those ads are trying hard to appeal to women using current trends for the reason that they want to sell their product. So are they just profiting off of trends? Are feminist commercials really empowering, or are they just using the feminist trend to sell more? I think I know the answer to that. So what about trans men, you might ask? Well, the first time a trans man was portrayed in a period product related ad was in 2016. That is literally so late to acknowledge that trans men get their periods. It was the brand Thinx for their period underwear. Even today, 6 years later, including gender fluid and trans men in period ads is not mainstream at all. So here is the ad. It's pretty artsy. It's a beautiful image in my opinion, and the text on the left does not mention that it is a trans man, which is great. I think we're on the right track with this ad, honestly. There should be more of them, but patience. Okay, so that was my conclusion. That was a very long first one for me, so I'm gonna let you go. I have a lot of ideas straying away from that whole period topic for future videos, so if you want to keep up with that, keep up with me, please follow me on Instagram. There it is. And subscribe, I guess. It was my first time uploading on here on a new channel, so I really do hope you enjoyed. And like I said in the intro, if you hated it, please do not tell me because I will cry. Bye now. See you in the next one. Bye.